Hello, good evening. The true scale of Britain's housing crisis has been laid bare by a new BBC investigation which suggests that only around half the new homes England needs were actually built in the last 3 years. Labour say the numbers show the government has failed. The Housing Minister, Brandon Lewis, now says the government wants 1 million homes built by 2020. Any doubt whether that can happen? Well, the numbers emerge as a report by the property company Rightmove show that asking prices for houses in England and Wales have seen their biggest jump in 13 years. In a moment, we'll discuss the situation with the architect, Richard Rogers. First, here's Duncan Weldon.
It's been a long time since Britain built enough homes to match rising need. New BBC figures today show that between 2011 and 2014, the UK built just half as many homes as it required. In response, the government says it wants to see 1 million homes built by 2020, 200,000 a year. Britain hasn't consistently built that many homes in decades. The government today, though, has been very clear. This 1 million figure isn't a target, it's an ambition. And the difference between an ambition and a target is, well, an ambition is less embarrassing when you don't hit it. And that might prove useful, because many in the housing industry don't think this ambition will be met. But even hitting 200,000 housing completions a year wouldn't be enough to match rising demand.
We need to build between about 240 or 250,000 homes a year to address need. Over the past decade or so, we've not even built half of that, so there's a lot of pent-up demand.
Housing starts in the last 3 decades were below the levels of the previous 3. The recession saw them take another dive. Back when the UK last consistently built 250,000 units a year, the makeup of the market looked very different. Local authorities were huge builders, something that's not been true for a generation. Of course, in many ways it was easier to build when these blocks went up in the 50s and 60s. One side effect of the Blitz was the Luftwaffe effectively freeing up prime development areas. Add in slum clearance programmes and land wasn't exactly in tight supply. New BBC figures show that Britain's housing supply shortage isn't just an issue in London and the South East. No region is building enough. And in percentage terms, the problem is most acute in the South West, the North East and Cumbria. For those in the not-for-profit sector, the private sector alone will never be able to build enough. They see a whole series of misaligned incentives.
Private sector won't meet the target alone. If you look at the number of homes that they've never built more than 120,000 homes in a year. They have a business model that doesn't reward them building more than 120,000 homes a year. Bluntly, scarce resources cost more. So if you limit the number of homes you build, you'll create more profits. And they're private businesses, you know, that's what they're supposed to do. So what it needs is for the third sector, for the public sector, for people like housing associations to come forward and build the homes.
One issue is the planning system. Peter Rees is now Professor of Place at UCL. Before that, he spent 30 years as Head of Planning at the City of London.
The rest of the world uses systems of planning which are proactive and are based upon master plans, where a local authority in consultation with the public and guided by their politicians will produce master plans for areas to show how they will change. Those can then be implemented working with developers. In this country we have a planning system which is reactive. Our plans don't tell people what they can do, simply what they can't do. Now, on the one hand, that's more flexible to changing economic circumstances. On the other hand, it's much harder to create a clear direction and take a long-term view of changing places.
The planning system has to balance longer-term needs against the immediate wishes of current residents. Britain's failure to build enough housing is a long-running problem. There isn't a simple, easy solution. But one thing which most housing experts agree would help would be changing planning law and freeing up more land for development, including on the green belt. But that would require a political battle which no government seems prepared to fight. And there's more to this debate than numbers. Solving Britain's housing crisis doesn't just mean building more homes, it means building the right kinds of homes in the right kind of place.
That was Duncan Weldon. Now, Richard Rogers, one of the world's greatest architects, is with me here, as is David Willetts, the former government minister, now a Conservative peer. Welcome to you both. And let's start with that ambition, not a target, of 1 million houses in the next 5 years. Will that solve the problem? Does it sound doable?
Well, I welcome that aim. I was chair of the Urban Task Force 15 years ago, and it is exactly the same that we said that's 15 years ago. We did a little bit better than what's been happening now, but basically, it's not the figure that's the problem, it's how you deliver it. We have critical problems. It's not to do with a shortage of land. We've got more planning sites with planning permission which are empty than any other country in comparison. So our problem is different. There are three problems. One is the government, which continuously changes all the time because it never and keeps on making commitments, but never actually delivers on those commitments. Another is the problem of the fact that our power, as we saw just now with Peter Rees, our power, we've given up our power. And really, housing should be seen like food. It should be seen like health. It should be like education. It's a right to the people to have a house.
So people are right to be sceptical when they hear a figure like that it probably hasn't happened before and it won't happen now.
Well, it used to happen in the 50s and 60s, and Harold Macmillan built 300,000 houses a year, but now, sadly, for over a decade, I think everybody agrees on the figures. We need over 250,000 houses a year, and we've actually been building about half that. So, yeah, we need to change gear and build a lot more houses.
And what needs to change for that to happen? Because we're stuck in this rut where promises are made, targets are made, nothing happens, then people come back and say, oh, we failed, but we'll do better next time.
Well, I thought one thing that Lord Rogers said where he made it sound more pessimistic than the situation is we've now got some more planning permissions coming through. We're now getting over 200,000 planning permissions per year, which is an improvement. But now the main thing is to get the houses built. Now, there was a critique of the big builders in that programme we've just seen. I think the small builders are important. They clearly want to get building, and the financial crash of 2008 wiped out a whole range of small local builders that were putting up apartment blocks, and we can get the finance through to them.
Just deal with the critique, because it was very simple, that the business model doesn't repay the building of houses. If you sit on land when it's scarce, you might as well sit on it and not build. That's got to change.
Yeah, but we, as so often with these problems, as well as the big incumbents, we've got to make room for the insurgents, and there are lots of small builders that we can get back into the market if we're imaginative about providing them with the finance that they used to be able to access 10 or 20 years ago and they can't access now. And that is certainly one of the priorities of getting those extra buildings onto the small sites dotted around in brownfields that local builders know about, but the big builders aren't interested in.
Richard Rogers, I wonder whether you'd agree that for there to be more housing for more people, others have got to sacrifice at some level. There's got to be a policy that might be more costly to some, more inconvenient to some, and we've got to see that affected before it frees up place for other people to have a house.
I think that our housing is the most expensive in the world, apart from Monte Carlo, which is sort of interesting. And I think, again, as Peter Rees pointed, and as you in a way pointed to when the Conservatives were building nearly 500,000 housing, in those days it was controlled by the people who elected the government. We've now handed that over to the volume house builders. I agree about the small house builders with you. And the volume house builders, they're a business, and obviously what they're interested in is the bottom line, profit. They're no great interest in building more houses. They want more profit.
But when
so
you
you've
look
got
at
to change
somebody like,
the system.
OK, so you look at Jeremy Corbyn, who's very happy to change the system. He backs mansion tax or a land value tax of some kind. What do you think it needs? Does it need charges on second homes? Does it need a different sort of buy-to-let pricing?
I think basically it needs local authorities, elected bodies, to take the responsibility to do, as they do in every other Western European country.
So it's nothing to do with a policy at a national level, then?
It's to do with the way that we've decided the policy to, unlike we don't do it with education, we don't do it with health, we're going to give it over to a private organisation called the Volume House Builder, whose interest, as I said, is not to make the maximum number of houses.
So don't we need the state to come in at this point? There are too many vested interests.
Yeah, there is a role for government, and I think actually Richard has gone a bit far in saying that, you know, we don't accept the role of government. Clearly there is. For example, in setting a framework in which, once it is accepted that there is a certain amount of housing needed in an area, at that point people have to go ahead and build them, improving the incentives for local authorities so that if they go ahead and build in the houses, they keep more of the revenues, and absolutely expecting local councils to and social housing bodies to build more.
What about disincentives for people who sit on the land? You know, what about something that puts people off?
Yeah. And remember, the people sitting on the land are often
Are you saying,
themselves...
yes, that should be introduced?
Because often they are themselves public sector agencies. Some of the worst culprits for sitting on this land are public sector bodies. The MOD, TfL. And certainly we must be very tough on them and require them to release their land. The public sector should not be a land hoarder itself.
How do you give that an urgency? What does it need to give it an urgency?
In any other country, and I really mean any, I remember we were just saying Spain went bankrupt because they built so many housing. We can't even build any. Well, we're building 110,000 housing about a year. That's the last time we built 110,000 was 1922. We're in a much bigger crisis at this moment. So we've got to change the political structure. We also have to have I agree with small builders, and we've got to innovate. There is no encouragement to innovate at all at the moment.
Thank you both very much indeed. Thanks for coming in.
The paper's over on the BBC News channel at 11:30.